There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I'm your host, Richard Schaff. The program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here by the grace of God. I'm going to open today's program with a verse of Scripture. Galatians 6:7. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Remember that for today's program. I see where truckers are refusing to deliver food into New York City. Truckers are refusing to carry loads into New York City and the surrounding suburbs, those like New Rochelle. This is an area hard hit by the coronavirus. Even as demand for groceries is double or triple normal levels as shoppers stockpile soup and everyday goods. The White House call for all of those leaving New York City to self-quarantine for 14 days has spooked some drivers. This according to people that are monitoring the shipments while delivering. Curfews and requests to register, quote, essential employees, end quote, have created additional friction. Some warehouse operators are even insisting on taking truck drivers' temperatures as they pull into the warehouses. Many truckers simply don't want to risk becoming infected and putting up with all the requirements. A March 25 report from the Supply Chain Analysis Network, that's a State of the Industry report organization, and their report, compiled by experts in the field, noted, quote, a particular concern related to the grocery supply chain serving the city of New York, end quote. While the report said, quote, the grocery supply chain should be able to sustain and enhance flows, end quote, it found that truckers have been much more likely to reject offers to deliver to the New York metropolitan area. There are about 8.62 million people in the 5 boroughs of New York City. As you might imagine, they eat a lot of food. And as more and more truckers refuse to go into the city, food shortages will inevitably crop up. What may begin to take place if the stores run out? What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to have civil unrest? Are we going to have roving gangs stealing? Are we going to have anarchy? Time will tell. What's behind it all, folks? Let's take a look at a few things that I just saw. These reports came to me on television, mostly Fox, I'll admit. But over the last couple of days, I'm taping this on Saturday the 28th. Listen to me. Listen to me. New York State is the #1 virus hotspot in the United States. Our president is sending one of the 2 U.S. hospital ships to New York Harbor. I think it's supposed to arrive in the harbor Monday, this coming Monday. The name of the Comfort. It's got about 1,000 beds in it. One of the 2. The other one's off the coast of California. The New York hospitals, one of them has made up a temporary morgue. Right. It's a makeshift deal, a morgue attached to the hospital. The U.S. government is putting up temporary tents for hospitals in the New York City area. I think they want one for each borough. I think they're going to put 5 of them up. It takes them about 3 days to put up a tent hospital. You see, there's no known cure for this virus. No place in the world. The U.S. has more virus per capita than any place in the world. And again, New York City area is the worst in our country. Not only is there no cure, there's no vaccine. There's no immunity. You can't get immunized. We have 4 times the number of cases of virus in the United States per population that China has. 4 times more than China per capita in the U.S. New York City's in a panic. Their hospitals are in a panic. We've got a case where one of the male nurses in one of the hospitals in New York City treating the sick got sick himself, fell over dead. They're so confused they couldn't wait. Did you see Cuomo hollering at the president for not getting those respirators up, the ventilators? And the president said they've been shipped. Confusion, folks. They were shipped to a warehouse owned by the state of New York some way in Pennsylvania, but they were there. And the bed shortage will be taken care of, too. At the same time, de Blasio down in New York, he's releasing over 200 prisoners from the Rikers Island prison in New York City. Total confusion, folks. Total confusion. They've canceled the Easter Mass. They've canceled the Jewish Passover. One hospital in New York, one located in Queens, reported 13 dead people in a 24-hour period. That was this past week. The coronavirus fallout could be worse than the financial crisis. Guggenheim Partners Global CIO Scott Minard tells Axios that the fallout from the coronavirus outbreak could be, quote, worse than the financial crisis, end quote. His words. Why does it matter? Well, he called out the, quote, cognitive dissonance in markets as stock prices hit new all-time highs in mid-February, saying in an open letter that he had never seen anything as crazy as what's going on right now in the stock market. His words. And then this. This came to my desk last Friday. Maybe some of you heard it. Franklin Graham, that's Billy's son, down in Charlotte. He sent word to Andrew Cuomo, what about babies' lives? You see, Cuomo even was talking about who's going to choose who lives and dies if we don't get these respirators. Who is going to be the one that's accountable for killing people because we don't have a respirator for them? As I said, there was several thousand of them in a warehouse that he couldn't find. But think back. Andrew Cuomo wondering who could decide who was going to live and dies. What about back in 2019 when Cuomo signed the Reproductive Health Act, which effectively allows a termination of unborn babies until their due date? Governor Cuomo, what about the babies' lives? And Franklin Graham sent a message I respectfully urge the governor to consider his statements. Franklin Graham urged New York Democrat Andrew Cuomo to think about his declaration amid the coronavirus crisis that human lives are, quote, not expendable, end quote. Graham posted the question in a post on Facebook. In response to Cuomo, he said at a daily briefing, quote, my father is not expendable, my mother is not expendable, and our brothers and sisters are not expendable, and we're not going to accept a premise that human life is disposable, end quote. Graham continued, I agree with Governor Cuomo on the high value of life, and I applaud his efforts to defend lives from the coronavirus. But yes, he signed that bill legalizing abortion up to birth for nearly any reason at all. And as I pointed out earlier, the Washington Examiner pointed out that Cuomo signed that reproduction health care in 2019. That one that effectively allows termination of the unborn babies until the due date. Cuomo praised the legislation back at that time in 2019. He said, and I'm quoting, today we're taking a giant step forward in the hard-fought battle to ensure a woman's right to make her own decisions about her own personal health, including the ability to access an abortion. With the signing of this bill, we are sending a clear message that whatever happens in Washington, women in New York will always have the fundamental right to control their own body, end quote, by Governor Andrew Cuomo back in 2019. Graham informed the governor, quote, in 2017 alone, 105,380 babies lost their lives by abortion in New York. Human life is not expendable, and we should work to save it from the womb to the tomb. You see, there's teachings throughout the Bible that children are very precious in the sight of God. Top drawer, number one in importance. Let me read our opening scripture. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. What am I saying? You interpret it. Prayerfully interpret it. Does this just apply to New York? I think as you're going to listen to some of my program today, this teaching, this fact applies to all of us in America. Now to the rest of our program. Taking stock on Strange Day. This past week, the week that changed America. Change came to the United States of America during the third week of March in 2020. It did not come all at once, though it came quite rapidly. As it happened in other lands, there was no explosion, no invasion, other than the microscopic one that nobody could see. There wasn't a fire, there wasn't a flood, no famine, no barbarians at the gates. Change came quietly in most towns and cities because the change was one of withdrawal, a shutting of municipal and regional and national doors. The weather was the same weather. The streets were the same streets. The emptiness fell bit by bit, piece by piece, until the most crowded of places became one of the most ghostly. Some stopped going out in the evening, then they stopped in the afternoon, then all day. Some stopped getting haircuts, and some stopped cutting hair. Some stopped going out to eat, and some restaurants shut their doors except for takeout and delivery. Some, many, most stopped going to school. Home became the primary landscape. Those who worked outside the home became those who work in the home, or became those who did not work at all. You know, it's kind of like you heard the 52 pickup, a sort of a kind card game where someone throws up a deck of cards and it lands all over the place, and when the cards are retrieved from the floor, they're the same cards, but they're in entirely different order, some upside down, some facing backwards, some are bent at the corners. Yeah, sort of like that, wasn't it? Delivering a pizza became an act of bravery. Supermarket shopping became an act of anxiety, both because of what people might not be able to get and because of what people might accidentally touch. Toilet paper became a source of stress and a reoccurring joke. Some people came to fear that anger was coming, and others grew deeply angry that fear was coming. Those who work at home sat by the glow of their computer screens. These became a college of pixelated portals into other people's living spaces. Tiny images of people's colleagues were stacked row by row as home officers came into the shambolic being. Overnight, the term, quote, to Zoom, roared out of the corporate settings and into our basements and kitchens and living rooms where it had never been used before. When change came to the United States of America last week, as it had already to China and Italy and many other places, it swatted some much harder than it did others. Kind of depended on where you lived, how much you earned, who you were. When change came, it came in many measurable ways that people who measure things are still just beginning to measure. Medical numbers and economic numbers will tell the biggest share of that story. But change came in unmeasurable ways too, and those are harder to capture. Yet they're just as real, and their stories are contained in the people who stayed home and didn't do what they usually do. Change came in the drunken drivers who didn't crash, in shots that were never fired, and bullets that didn't pierce flesh and organs. It's first kisses that didn't happen. It's skies that weren't as polluted. In trips of a lifetime that couldn't be taken. In inspirations that didn't strike. Conversations that didn't take place. Photographs that weren't snapped. Videos that weren't made. Maybe most of all in dollars that weren't able to be earned, and lives that weren't able to be saved. Holdouts remained as you'd expect in a culture built on individualism. Young people, confident in invincibility, grinned, played on the spring break beaches. In states where governors restricted movements and commerce, people bristled and said it went too far, did too much, damaged the livelihoods of too many. Jobs just started disappearing. They were deleted from the landscape in batches, as if it was a tactical move in a city-building video game. The people in their homes on the inside looking tentatively out struggled with the change. Groceries were bought and sometimes hoarded, Images of empty shelves shared online by the tens of thousands produced even more distress. Family relationships were suddenly placed under stress by the proximity and unease. Wi-Fi became clogged, struggles slowed. Hands wrung over income tax deadlines until, to great relief, they pushed those back too. Time, or at least the notion of it, changed too. Thursday seemed like Friday, or maybe Friday seemed like a Tuesday. Weekday melded into weekend. Lunchtime sometimes decided to arrive in the late afternoon. For some happy hour, if you could still call it that. Sometimes it came hours before the afternoon rush hour. That was okay, because by Wednesday, in many places, that was gone too. The television and the internet, already many people's hearths and constant companions, well, it burrowed even deeper into lives. Heads talked, experts laid out numbers, flattened the curve, became an incantation. Officials promised and paired and thrusted. In this particular week of change, the fiercest debate centered around two key notions. One was how to react in the strongest way possible. The other was whether reading and reacting is the strongest way possible, or was it the actual problems? Some tried to tell the story of this change as one of obliviousness and common sense. Some seemed sure that the country that they loved and had known for some time now, and some who had fought for it, they saw it disappearing before their eyes. In the United States of America last week, the events themselves came fast and loud and fierce. They unfolded as indivisible orgasms marched their invisible and perilous march. But change came gradual and sometimes inaudible. The thing about change is that sometimes it requires an inventory to measure it. In many cases, the people who are changed are the ones to take that inventory. That may not happen here, at least not immediately. The change, those who would undertake that inventory may be too busy for a while, because the fourth week of March in 2020, well, folks, now it's here, and more change is coming. And welcome to the normal. Our Constitution is now dead on arrival. The United States of America has gone through a coup. Nobody was assassinated this time around. Nobody was marched out of the Oval Office under guard. There was no proclamation of a regime change. However, it's increasingly clear that Trump and Pence are no longer running the government. Some of this was inevitable due to the width, depth, and height of the deep state. Let's go back some three and a half years. What was to be the coronation of a modern-day Stalin by the election of Hillary Clinton was briefly interrupted by a freak of nature as the people of the United States defied the mainstream media and all the political pressure by electing Donald Trump. This was the Hail Mary of all time. Like a submarine at war, the deep state was previously rigged for, quote, silent running. That was so their existence would not alert and alarm a sleeping American public. However, beneath the scenes, America was no longer governed by publicly known and elected officials. The ongoing and growing bureaucracy controlled they controlled the elected officials. Many were compromised at very interesting events that took place as scandalous inaugural events, and the happenings and implied happenings were used to control votes on key issues. Then there was the insider trading deals followed by mysterious, quote, dark money given to some political campaign for private gain. You know, that kind of explains why Chai Kamali, Senator Dianne Feinstein and her husband, how they could come into the Senate as millionaires but will leave as multi-billionaires. It explains how Mad Maxine Waters from the Southern Cal Dome can live in the most expensive house in her congressional district. They're both public servants. Their salary, approximately $170,000 a year. You see, our legislative branch has become the biggest and most profitable whorehouse in the whole world. You got free health care for a lifetime? No, but the prostitutes living on Capitol Hill do. Have you got a lifetime pension that's guaranteed by the government? One forever and a day? No, you don't. But they do. And Congress tells us to follow the 15-day mandatory social distancing projects while they congratulate each other in small places where they can cast their votes on a giveaway to so many special interests with your money. Who are they fooling, folks? Well, Trump was to save America. He was to make it great again. However, when Trump was inaugurated, it was already too late. The patient was in declining health. The United States of America had stage 4 cancer. Attention, America. Your civil liberties, your very Constitution, is now on life support. Congress is bought off in a corrupt campaign system and through rampant insider trading. The Supreme Court knows just how far they can go. Even Justice Roberts could not and did not stand up to the illegal and unconstitutional requirement that Obamacare should become mandatory. Our entire government is under the spell of the deep state. And who's the deep state? They serve the global banks. Ultimately, their purpose is to destroy American populism and replace it with a modern-day globalist form of the Bolshevik communism where the state rules all. This has already been accomplished, folks, through the virus mitigation. We now see businesses being divided up in government-approved essential businesses and government disapproval non-essential businesses, which can no longer stay in business. Trump wants these businesses to open up by Easter, but he's being shouted down by the very people who have overthrown this government, the CDC, the State Department, or as Trump recently told us, the Deep State Department. The whims of the so-called New World Order are being carried out by the radicalized Democratic Party, where they've never seen a private property, an earned wage, or a civil liberty that they've liked. You might ask, where's the proof for such a bold statement? Are you nuts? Well, folks, simply take a look at the local containment policies in response to the COVID-19 threat. It's Democratic-controlled cities where they now, listen to me, these Democratic-controlled cities where they've closed the gun shops and liquor stores, while Pelosi pushes for an expansion of federally funded baby murdering abortions as she fights to keep all abortion clinics open as, quote, essential business. Criminals are being freed from prison and jails while law-abiding citizens are imprisoned in their homes. Meanwhile, the actions of closing liquor and gun stores begs the question, what the hell do nitrates and alcohol have to do with the virus? They don't. But they've got everything to do with establishing an unconstitutional control over the American people and their property interest, while the common people, in the words of Marie Antoinette, are eating cake. On that, take note, we shall see a French counter-revolution coming to our shore? No, not likely. As No Child Left Behind and Obama's Communist Corps has left us with a nation that barely survives in order to get to Friday, much less to be able to decipher the events of the day in any kind of historical context. In the last 3 weeks, America's had its country stolen from it, its job base destroyed, right to travel curtailed. Heck, now even to grill a hamburger in the backyard, it is of questionable legality, much less target shoot or dare protect one's home and have any say in their future fate. Your fate, folks, your determination to what you do and where you're going has been destroyed. Right now, America is the second most repressive government in the world. It's right next to the Chi-Coms. Food riots are coming, and we'll see a Chi-Com response from bureaucracies controlled by our own deep state. For a while, Trump was seemingly able to stop the spread of cancer, the cancer of the Democrat Party, which are nothing but communists in drag. The economy under Trump immediately improved because Trump reversed the effects of the free trade agreement. We became energy independent under Trump. For working Latinos, Afro-Americans, and women, Trump was the best president ever. Economically speaking, these three groups of American stakeholders, the best they'd ever seen. Despite baseless accusations from the communist left of being racist, this president became the best leader for all the people that this nation had ever seen. In effect, he is the best civil rights president in history. He reduced food stamps, welfare, and empowered inner-city youth with the job training programs. In 3 years, this president restored dignity and self-respect to people that had been under the spell of the Democratic Party for the last several decades. However, all the social, economic, and political progress made by the president in the last 3 years have been wiped out in 3 weeks by our reaction to the coronavirus. How bad will it get? Some predict 50% unemployment. The outcome of the coronavirus will be that the whole of America is being bought and paid for by the so-called elite. One morning this past week, we Americans awakened to a nation where we had sold our freedom for a $1,200 stimulus check. The deep state now has complete control over your finances, property, health, freedom. They now control your food and transportation, as well as your ability to pay your bills and put a roof over your family's head. The last time the takeover of a society was so great was during the establishment of feudalism. And would you care to guess what role you're going to play in this post-mortem non-feudalism society? You are a serf, and your children are now condemned to the life of a serf. But don't worry, many of them won't live long lives, as we still chemtrail the skies, consume GMOs, and our brains are being lit up by 5G. Can you say game over, or will you say Smith & Wesson in Jeffersonian style? Franklin warned us what would happen if we ever traded liberty for security. Jefferson warned us what would happen if we ever gave up our rights, particularly the Second Amendment. If I trusted our leaders to only impose unconstitutional restrictions until the virus was under control, I would willingly comply personally. But who could ever trust these institutions that are corrupt and behave as modern-day brothels? I cannot say this virus is not real. I think it is. But with this criminal leadership, we'd be better off risking catching the virus than sacrificing our liberties, because a lot fewer of us would end up dying. In the words of Eric Holder, quote, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," end quote. Welcome to the new normal, my fellow comrades. Wait until you see what is next. And don't have time to bring you all of it, but there's a paper that hit my desk this week, a confirmation from a very well-known American constitutional lawyer who noted our government, using the COVID-19, took away our fundamental rights. Robert Burns, American constitutional lawyer, he's a representative of high-profile clients in civil and criminal cases, and he's known for his exacting political prognosis in American international elections. Do you really think it couldn't happen here? Could we quarantine our Constitution? Are we already doing it? We did it, folks, this past week. Panics from pandemics unleash unchecked government power. The very premise of popular films like V for Vendetta, they revealed this. There was a group that used the virus to seize power and create a totalitarian society. Anyone could witness this from far-off lands, watching the news about China locking people up in their homes, and then removing them screaming from those homes whenever the state wanted. World War I and the Great Depression birthed forms of government with leaders like Hitler, Mao, Mussolini, and Stalin. Lockdowns, curfews, troops on the street, governments handing out free cash, the utter madness was entirely avoidable. But governments across America have used the pandemic and the media stroke panic around the pandemic particularly to limit, restrict, or remove First Amendment freedoms and free association with officials. We've been complaining about political restraints. Watch what you're going to see. They're limiting how many people can worship in God's house now. 10. They're limiting where you can travel and what your excuse can be if it's not for a sanctioned government purpose. Others have denied or declared the right to deny Second Amendment rights of gun purchases for personal safety. And this is a time when governments are issuing no arrest and no detention orders for a wide range of people and ordering the freeing of many inmates from prisons and jails across America. They want to coordinate with tech companies to survey and spy on everybody's movements and activities in violation of the Fourth Amendment and potentially waive our medical rights to privacy in multiple contexts. Stay-at-home orders deprive you of your profession, your occupation, your business, and property without any due process of law at all, beyond the executive fiat in violation of the Fifth Amendment right to due process. Governments request the authority to involuntarily imprison any American on mere fear of infection without any probable cause of crime or clear and present danger of harm. This is what's happening in America today. This is what happened in America this past week. And be prepared for future confinement, future harassment, future dictatorial policies. The real pandemic threat is here. It's the panic that will guarantee and quarantine the end of our Constitution. Goodbye until next week.